And joining us now to talk about this commission on the National Defense Strategy Report for the United States is General Jack Keane. General Keane, of course, is a former Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army and an expert here at the Cipher Brief. General Keane, it's so good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great seeing you, Suzanne.
You know, I wonder if we could just start off with you telling me a little bit about the purpose of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy of the U.S. report. What were you trying to set out to do here?
Well, the Congress for a number of years has been asking, the Department of Defense to report to them in terms of what strategy they're developing and the implementation of that. And it started out by an assessment of the Quadrennial Defense Review a number of years, which I did participate in on behalf of the Congress. And then during the Trump administration, they changed it to a Commission on the National Defense Strategy. And so that was Trump Matters. And I was on that one, appointed by John McCain. And this time, it's obviously Biden, Austin. And what the Congress has always wanted is to get a detailed look at the Department of Defense's thoughts and policies and processes to establish a strategy and the implementation of it. And then the commission reports back to the Congress in testimony and with a report, and also sends a report to the President of the United States and also to the Secretary of Defense. And it normally takes about 18 months to 2 years to get through all of this. You're in top secret, compartmentalized briefings most of the time with all the principals and officials in our government, not just in the Department of Defense, but in other departments and intelligence agencies. You go around the world and talk to the leaders, government officials, and also to allies in terms of what has taken place. So it's pretty comprehensive. We got it done sooner this time because we clearly wanted to render a report while campaigns were still going on for national office, so that the campaigns can read them and make any adjustments that they want to make in terms of going forward. So that's kind of what this is about.
It's bipartisan, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Republicans appoint 4 people, the Democrats appoint 4 people, and we rendered a unanimous bipartisan report, and which is what we did 4 years ago as well. But to achieve that, usually you have a lot of common interest in terms of what has taken place, and where we arrived at together, I think speaks more about the seriousness and danger we're facing than anything else.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit, Jack. Let me read. The report highlighted that the U.S. last fought a global conflict in World War II, which ended 80 years ago, and the U.S. was last prepared to fight a global war during the Cold War, which ended 35 years ago. The U.S. is not prepared to fight a global war today, was one of the findings, despite facing the most serious risk since World War II of a near-term major war. So what I want to ask you is, how bad is this?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Most of us believe we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetime. And it's really attributed to China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea coming together, cooperating, collaborating, and actually coordinating. And they become increasingly assertive and aggressive. They have come to the conclusion that the United States leadership is weak, that the United States is in decline. And as a result of that, they are attempting to take advantage of our vulnerabilities. And they see it as a huge opportunity for them to reset the strategic framework that exists in the world, where the United States has led this framework post-World War II with like-minded democracies. And they see this opportunity to depose the United States as that leader and establish their own strategic framework that obviously would be in that interest. So you take China and the Indo-Pacific region. For decades, we have had a decided advantage economically and also militarily in that region. China caught up a number of years ago economically, but also did so militarily and has actually surpassed us. So much so that the United States remains the world's military superpower, not just because of our nuclear weapons. China and Russia have those, obviously, as adversaries, but because we can project power any place in the world. And the American people have seen us do that, quite successfully. But the reality is when you get within 1,000 miles of the Chinese mainland, the military advantage moves decisively to China. And we have concluded through war games analysis, something that the previous uh, National Defense Strategy Commission concluded, that if we got in a war with China today, next week, a year from now, 2 years from now, we would be challenged to win, and indeed we could lose. And as a result of us being involved in that kind of a war, it is very likely that our adversaries, particularly Russia and Europe and, and Iran in the Middle East, supported by North Korea, would indeed likely start another conflict. The United States strategy is resource for one war and deter all others. Post Cold War, we were resourced for two wars and a contingency. So it's obvious that we would be challenged. To give you an example of it, and you play a war game, we start to run out of much needed missiles within 2 weeks of a conflict with China because of the deplorable condition of our defense industrial base. And you may ask the question, well, how did this happen? How did the United States? I mean, the American people are clueless about what I'm talking about because this administration doesn't want to tell them what's happening here, in my view, because the American people will say, well, what are you going to do about it? And the answer to that would change all of this administration's political, social objectives to be able to reset the table to deal with the seriousness of the threat. I think it's quite irresponsible of them not to expose the American people. And one of the purposes of our report is to get as much attention to this as possible so the American people can be informed of it. But it is a serious problem, and that's why I think it has caught some attention beyond what happened 4 years ago when we rendered a similar report.
Yeah, I think to your point, Jack, you bring up a really important issue, which we know as early as 2007 from Russian President Vladimir Putin that he wanted to pose a risk to the United States and no longer wanted to live in a world where the United States dominated so much of the global power. And now, though, we have this collaboration, which is giving all of the adversaries in this case, as you mentioned, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, a whole different kind of power. And you also mentioned perceived weakness in the United States. So I want to ask you a somewhat provocative political question, but that is the US changes leadership every 4 years. China doesn't do that. Russia doesn't do that. Iran doesn't do that. North Korea doesn't do that. What can be done internally, Jack, to make sure that there's strength in national and global security that transfers from one administration to another when the politics are somewhat divisive in this country right now? Not somewhat, really divisive.
Yeah, to me, the secret sauce is really the American people. I mean, the American people, once informed and educated, are not going to let their political leaders put them at undue risk and risk their very livelihood of their children and their grandchildren. And there's history that supports that. But the reality is, they have not been exposed to it. Let me give you a vivid example of it. The State of the Union, we all remember that took place a few months ago. 4 days after the State of the Union, the intelligence services provided testimony to the Congress of the United States on a scheduled basis, which they do every year. And they laid out a concise version of what I just said, that these four nations that I described represent the most serious and dangerous threat to the United States that they have seen in decades. That is a summation of hours of testimony that they provided. Where was any of that in the State of the Union? None. None of that was in the State of the Union. But the intelligence services that were reporting out work for the National Command Authority, work for the president, work for the vice president, work for the national security apparatus that they are a part of. And none of that was provided to the American people. That is why I have strong feelings, and so does all the members of the commission. We have got to get the word out to the American people that the risk is far too great. And look, we can fix this thing. We were outgunned, outmanned by the Soviet Union during the Cold War until we woke up post-Vietnam. And we're ending the 9/11 wars. Obviously, they're over. And we got to wake up. We woke up after the Vietnam War. We happen to have some very creative and innovative leaders who looked at it, experimented with what would need to be deal with the Soviet Union, which was primarily a land-based force supported by air power. And how do we cope with that? They creatively came up with new systems. They played war games, and they put together a structure. Even though we were outgunned, they had more divisions, they had more tanks, they had more artillery, etc. We put together a formidable capability that would impose cost if they invaded, and then we exercised it right in front of them every 2 years. The Soviet generals never made a recommendation to their leadership to take Eastern Europe, and to take Western Europe, even though they wanted it. And the reality is because there was sufficient capability there, and there was no doubt that we would use it. Deterrence is made up of two parts. One, real capability that your adversary recognizes will do damage to them. Two, willingness to use it. And we demonstrate our willingness to use it because we exercised right in front of them. I believe our adversaries today look at us and see a military that it has eroded because of the 9/11 wars and has not been able to catch up in terms of its conventional capability to the degree that it should. And they also question our will. Yeah. And that is why this is such a dangerous situation.
I want to get to that in just a minute, and really how the nature of war is changing on the technology front and what we're seeing in Ukraine. But before I do, the commission also said that it finds that DoD's business practices, Byzantine research and development, and procurement systems, reliance on decades-old military hardware, and a culture of risk avoidance reflect an era of uncontested military dominance. Such methods are not suited to today's strategic environment, which you just addressed part of that. My question is, if you had to assign a level of confidence today, Jack, that we can make the necessary changes called for in the report in the necessary time frame, which is so important, what level of confidence would you render?
I'm not as confident that we can do it as quickly as we should be. We should be doing it. The Department of Defense clearly will take some major changes. We have ossified bureaucracy there. We have known this for years, that there's been problems with the business practices of the Defense Department. It goes back 25, 30 years. But the problem is we still were so dominating post-Cold War, where we're the world's only military superpower. And then we were preoccupied with the 9/11 war, certainly, during that time frame, that it sort of camouflaged the reality that our adversaries were seeing opportunity for themselves. And so those business practices that have been lacking for some time now are accentuated because the risk is so great. And what the Defense Department, when you talk to the top officials, they have a sense of what needs to be done. They know that they need to move to the commercial sector, non-defense commercial sector, where most of the innovation and technology development is taking place. There was a time where most of the innovation and technology development was actually done by the defense industry, and it was GPS and other things. The internet was passed out to the commercial industry as a result of it. The commercial industry has long since passed the defense industry in terms of innovation and technology development. And the Defense Department has got to figure out how to bring in that commercial industry, whose cycle system is turning very quickly, and ours to get a platform takes 15 years on average. That is absolutely unacceptable given the threats that we're facing. That we've got to turn that technology on and be able to develop it at scale. But the processes and business practices inside the department are truly risk averse. It's all about uh, low cost, stay on schedule, long schedule, and it built into the schedule is all sorts of risk aversion, so that there's not too much requirement scale, etc. Testing, testing, testing over and over and over again. And meanwhile, when you bring in industry leaders from the commercial non-defense sector and they look at what you're doing, I mean, they scratch their heads and they probably say to themselves, they won't say it to us, how did you guys ever win a war doing this? But we have got to fundamentally change. That change, I believe, has to come from the top, Suzanne. It's not going to come from the
Mm-hmm.
bottom. And also, we need to get the munitions and the weapons in terms of the scale of volumes of weapons. And I'm talking legacy systems that we have now, the missiles that we need in our arsenal now, the ammunition that we need in our arsenal, the war in Ukraine, and to a certain degree, the war in the Middle East and Gaza has accentuated, how bare our arsenals are. And if we're challenged to provide those kind of resources to an ally to use in a limited war, can you imagine the challenge we're facing if we're fighting multiple wars? So there's much work to be done here. Listen, I think we beat these authoritarian regimes in the long run, Suzanne, but I'm worried about the near term. And the reason we'll beat them is because capitalistic democracy, we're innovative, we're the technology leaders of the world. Half of the capital in the world today is where? It's in the United States, not just generated by us, but generated by other people in the world who invest in us. Why are they investing in us? Because we're the innovators, we're the technologists. We have changed the world, and we can turn that all on to a military application, I believe. But it's going to take strong leadership from the top all the way down into the Defense Department.
Yeah, and finding ways, whether it's through the procurement system or other avenues, to really bring in a lot more of that outside innovation that you talked about. Jack, I'm curious. I just would like to go down the dark path with you for just a moment. What happens if the U.S. is unsuccessful in making this change to the new collective adversary? If we're still trying to fight a post-Cold War era battle or war, if you will, with how we're equipped today, what's worst case scenario? And then let's talk about best.
Well, if you just take just think about it. In the last 3 or 4 years, we have three strategic geographic areas defined by the last two administrations.
Mm-hmm.
Not surprising, Europe, the Middle East, and Indo-Pacific region. And we have war in two of those regions. And that's new. And in the third region, the Indo-Pacific region, China is threatening war. And that alone should be alarming. Let's just take the Indo-Pacific region. If we go to war with China in the Indo-Pacific region, over the South China Sea, over Taiwan, as we lose, as we indicated, or we abdicate and choose not to get involved and they're able to take Taiwan, we will no longer be a Pacific power of consequence. It will impact us globally in terms of our influence in in the global South, in South America, in Africa, and obviously also in Europe. That's the reality of it. The and as a result of that, every one of our allies in the Indo-Pacific region would have to make a deal with China because now they're the big guy on the block and they own the block and they have to make a deal with them. And we would be reduced dramatically into something that would be difficult for us to recognize since post-World War II, where we have influenced the world, not just because of our military power, but I think our economic engine, but also our values and what we have stood for and how important that is to help people live a decent life and lead that life and grow and develop their children, free of repression and authoritarianism. The authoritarian regimes would be encouraged as a result of a PRC or China victory over the United States losing its influence, not only in the Indo-Pacific region, but the world writ large. The world would look very different through the prism of a much reduced U.S. influence in the world and what that means to our allies. It, even talking to our allies in Europe today that see Russia's aggression and know full well that Russia intends to expand beyond Ukraine. If you're talking to people in those countries, and they don't have to be government officials, what they say to you, after trivia is, what is going on with the United States? You are becoming a weak power. The aggression is stepping up. People are taking advantage of you. You're not willing to confront the adversaries as you have been in the past. They're not talking about Democrat Republicans here. They're just talking about the United States, period. What they're losing confidence in us, and I understand it. And you look at the authoritarian regimes and the advantages that they have achieved. It's no wonder people are feeling that way. So that's the dark side of it, and that eventually affects our prosperity, our economic influence as well. It eventually comes home to roost to the American people in terms of the quality of our life experience. That's why people who can't see the connection with help Ukraine now, defeat Russia now, and stop Russia from expanding. Oh, Russia's not going to expand. People, they write that off. That's not going to happen. Oh, really? Well, it's indisputable based on classified briefings that people have received. It's indisputable based on the leakage of some of those classified briefings that the Germans did, largely, I think, to convince their own people that there really is a bear in the woods, that Russia is intent is to truly bring Eastern Europe back under its control. And Ukraine is a start point to that, and a necessary one, given the size of the country and the fact that they'd be able to move their military capability to the western border of Ukraine, which would threaten Poland, Romania, and the Balkans, etc. And they clearly are already there in terms of proximity to the Baltic states, given the closeness of those countries and the lack of military capability that those countries have. Yes,
Yeah.
this thought process, while it's rendered in this report, many of our allies who are living this every single day and feel this aggression out there, they are very much in tune to it. In some respects, much more so than the American people are.
Yeah, I've heard that repeatedly from traditional and very close U.S. allies that there's an incredible amount of concern about the unpredictability of a consistent U.S. policy around the world. Let's talk about Ukraine for just a moment, because you also wrote a very interesting article in the New York Post just recently that was headlined, "The war is fraught but winnable in Ukraine if the West steps up against Russia." So once again, this is an opportunity that you see for the U.S. Jack, it's the whole U.S. support has been criticized for a number of years now, since the full-scale invasion launched in 2022, for the U.S. and the other allies not doing enough quickly enough. So where are we today, and how likely is it that more U.S. support on the ground, regardless of who it's led by, will actually turn the tide in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, the key to turning it to Ukraine's favor are a couple of things. One is Russia has made some marginal gains on the ground, despite the fact that Putin has mobilized 300,000 more troops and provided them with an adequate amount of military equipment, financed largely by China, by the way, who's buying their oil and also providing every component you can think of short of the end state weapon itself. All the things you need to build weapons and make munitions, they're helping them with. But the reality is they made some marginal gains on the ground this past year, but nothing near what they thought they would do. Why? Poorly trained, poorly equipped, staggering casualties to those 300, tens of thousands of them just ground up dead as a result of it. Air power has had some impact on energy infrastructure in a way that it hasn't in the past, and also on the civilian population, largely due because they don't have the interceptors. They used to shoot down 80 to 90% of everything that was fired at their cities, and now it's under 40%. And that was due to primarily to the delay in the U.S. support that was tied up in political debate in the Congress of the United States. On the Ukrainian side, they've obviously gone into a defensive crouch because they don't have the capability to do much more than that on the ground, but they've been holding their own. But remarkably so, not having a navy at all, they've been able to defeat Russia's Black Sea Navy and push it literally out of the Black Sea. And as a result of that, the export of grain that there is their major industry is flowing out to the world writ large. And they've done that through their own imagination, innovation, using air drones, undersea drones, surface drones, etc., to be able to defeat a navy that's in the area while not having a navy yourself. I think that's probably unprecedented in history. So those are positive things. What the Ukrainians need now is sustained support from the United States and the Europeans. The United States is still not there from a policy perspective. They won't say it. But what they really want is move to a negotiation as quickly as possible, similar to the pressure they're putting on Netanyahu in the Middle East war as well. And they've wanted this almost from the outset, not publicly, but privately. And that is why they don't give them all the weapon systems that they need when they need it. The Europeans last year looked at this and said, that is a hollow policy. And the thought that Russia is going to escalate to tackle nuclear weapons is unfounded. It is psychological and emotional rhetoric designed to break our will and not provide the support. The Europeans gave up on that theory that this administration still holds, and they pushed us to provide tanks. They pushed us to provide the long-range missile systems, and they pushed us to get into the F-16 business, all done by the Europeans. The Europeans matching and have gone past what the United States is providing to Ukraine financially because they see the seriousness of it. It's their neighborhood, and they know that they're next in Eastern Europe for sure if they don't stop Russia in Ukraine. The administration is not there, and that has been the problem from the outset. That one of the reasons why this war is protracted is because of the administration providing support in half measures and not giving Ukraine all they needed when they needed it to win this thing. And that's really unfortunate. So
also on Congress, right? Because Congress held up the passage of the aid package for months.
yeah.
As
And
more,
there's an element in the Republican Party, certainly, that doesn't want to fund Ukraine. They don't see it as a major problem. They think that we should pivot and provide our resources on China. If they do just a little bit of educating themselves about the relationship of China and Russia, and China is doing everything it can to help Russia win that war in Ukraine. Why? Because if Russia wins, China wins. If Russia can cause more problems in Europe, the pressure is off China in terms of what they can get away with in the Indo-Pacific region. They know the United States will be bogged down in Europe and also give them a free hand in the Indo-Pacific region. They see this for what it really is. It's unfortunate that some leaders cannot see it and are pretending that we shouldn't get involved. This is just a European problem. Well, we found out painfully during World War II how bankrupt that attitude was, that was a European problem. This is a global problem, what these four countries are trying to achieve in the world, and that is their domination at the expense of ours and like-minded democracies. And you've got to see it for what it really is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. My personal opinion in this is just that if people who can't see how the dots are connected are really going to make bad decisions. But let me ask you, if you're President Zelensky, you're sitting in Kyiv, you're looking at the U.S. election coming up. Kamala Harris may have her own different policies toward Ukraine. We don't know, but we know what the Biden administration's policies have been. And then President Trump has sort of famously now made comments that he would have this war wrapped up very, very quickly. What are you thinking when you're President Zelensky, and how are you trying to prepare for the result of November's election, whichever way it may go?
Yeah. Well, for your audience to understand, I don't get involved in supporting policy positions from people who are running for national office because I don't want to have any influence over people's decisions. I just draw back from it. But I will say this because President Trump was president for 4 years, and the Biden administration is obviously currently executing policy. And I would say that the policy right now is not what it should be, as I indicated, and it needs to change, and likely would not change unless we did have a change in national leadership. As it pertains to President Trump, the only thing I would suggest about President Trump is, having had some personal experience with this. When it comes to foreign policy and national security, his policies were pretty solid in the sense that he pushed back on Russia. After 8 years, and Obama wouldn't do anything about Russia's aggressiveness in Syria and their aggressiveness in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. President Trump, despite the fact that he told the American people how much he loved Putin and the rest of it, his policies were solid, and certainly Russia understood that. He was willing, to confront their aggression. And the same thing dealing with Iran. They, from the outset, understood that Iran was the strategic opponent in the Middle East, and met with the 55 leaders that very summer of 2017, and told those leaders that I will stand with you against the Iranian Iran, our strategic enemy here. And I think the pattern of that behavior, the pattern of that rhetoric turned out to be valid. So I think while, President Trump, like most presidents, would rather not have to get involved in conflict in these regions, when U.S. interests are clearly at stake, his past policies I largely supported, although I did have some disagreements with him on a couple of them. So I only comment about that. I'm not commenting about what he's proposing in the campaign, because I don't want to get involved in that. And I am taking issue with the Biden administration's policies as it pertains to all three regions of the world. I don't believe fundamentally that we're confronting our adversaries to the degree that we need to. And I'm not necessarily saying military confrontation, quite the extraordinary. I do believe there's so many other things we can do to confront an adversary other than military means. But I do suggest that in pushing back on the Iranians in the Middle East, who are at war with Israel and attempting to destroy that state and push us out of the region, that we should be executing some measured military operations against the Iranians' capabilities to support their proxies from Iran. And I don't think this administration has any mind to do anything like that.
Jack, I have one final question for you, but before I ask the final question, I have a pre-final question, which is more on the personal side. You talked about sort of your politics. You and I have known each other for a number of years. I know that, former President Trump, while president, asked you twice to be Secretary of Defense. If he were to ask you again, what would you tell him?
Well, I don't think he would do that for a third time. But no, I would decline. I think there's very capable people to do that kind of work, and I would be more than happy to provide any advice or assistance that he wanted. And I did that on a couple of occasions. A couple of them were consequential. I would do that, or help his advisors. But in terms of going back into public office, I had 38 years of it. I've been very engaged in it ever since, much more than I ever thought I would be. Yeah. And chairing an important think tank and being engaged in foreign policy and national security virtually every day of my life. I think I'm trying to make a contribution in a different way.
Which you're certainly doing. You're certainly doing.
Service.
That's right. And I should mention, too, you are a member of the board of the Cipher Brief. You are a chairman at the Institute for the Study of War. You are a regular contributor on Fox News. You're members of commissions. So I think it's clear that your service to the country is continuing, whether or not you're in that role or not. Jack, okay, final last question, I promise. You mentioned at the top of this conversation how important really it is for the American people to understand what's at stake here. So I'm just going to ask you directly, what is your message, either based on the work that you did for the commission or everything else that you know based on your experience working national security for, as you mentioned, well over 38 years now? What is your message to the American people?
Well, first of all, I have great confidence in them. And in terms of once informed and once educated, they do have influence over our political leaders at the local, state, and most importantly, national level. I think the thing that we have to do is get them educated and informed. And my message to them is that I'm not trying to scare you, but that I believe you should be treated as adults that you really are. And we have been here before. We have faced horror before in terms of our national security. And we're facing a real challenge now. Our very livelihood is being threatened by these four regimes, and they see weakness. And we have got to step up and confront them. And we have the capability to do that. We have to get additional capacity levels into our arsenals as quickly as possible, but we have to focus the entire government apparatus on the problem, much as we did in World War II. It's not just the Department of Defense. It's not just the State Department. We need all the elements of national power to focus on the reality of what we are facing. And you, the American people, deserve to be educated on what the problem is, how serious it is, that it does affect your livelihood, it will affect the quality of your life, and it will risk the lives of your grandchildren if we continue down this path. At the same time, hold our leaders accountable to doing something meaningful and substantive about this threat and reduce the risk that we currently have.
Yeah. Jack, as CEO and publisher of the Cipher Brief, I hope that people listen to what you have to say and read publications like ours and several others that don't take any political sides and just straight up focus on what the issues are. Also, with the Institute for the Study of War, that does some great work with you as chairman, of course, in helping people understand what's at stake as well. Former Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, so much more than that. General Jack Keane. Jack, thank you so much for being here. Really
Let me
appreciate
just
it.
add one thing. I really appreciate what the Cipher Brief does every single day. And the very thing that I'm talking about here is educating and informing the American people and influencers throughout American society, government officials, business people, etc., who understand as a result of what they're reading in the Cipher Brief on a regular basis that there is real danger here. And an educated, informed body politic in terms of the American people really is the answer to this major challenge. And you're making that contribution every single day, Suzanne, and appreciate your leadership in doing that and appreciate the quality of the product that you turn out on a regular basis.
Thank you so much, Jack. We have a great team and we work with amazing people. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been great talking to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, delighted, enjoyed it. Thank you.